So, good morning, everybody. I want to review AEW Dynamite. And I do want to say that I've been having issues watching Dynamite. Like, sometimes, I'm not really into the matches. And I think the biggest thing that I like about Dynamite and things that I like about professional wrestling is progression. And sometimes, AEW struggles with progression. And sometimes they're a little repetitive. And I also feel that like sometimes, they actually go into interesting directions. So I want to start by saying that the best thing that I like most about last night was Swerve versus Kenny Omega. And a lot of people were kind of like saying too that, oh well, I just had a bit of a cupcake on me. But a lot of people were kind of saying too, like it was a really great match. It was a great match. They really start with a lot of energy. They're both really desperate to get a win because they both understand that, winning means a lot in AEW. If you win, more than likely you're probably going to get a shot at Dynasty. And wins and losing does matters. And that was kind of really like the story, the theme of why this match exists really. This wasn't just like, oh, let's throw two people together like two characters in a video game. This was okay, the story is what matters is a victory. And there is a it looked like Aubrey got injured. A lot of people say if you look at it slowly, Swerve put her in the way, and I don't really see that. What I kind of saw was like she got injured. Swerve got the pinfall on Kenny Omega. He got mad and livid, like, okay, you know what? I do all this shit really. I've always kind of like thrown everything that I've had, and I had to go over one more obstacle, really. So I really think that that's kind of how I feel about Swerve was that maybe he was trying to be like, you know what? I'm so sick and tired of I'm so sick and tired of getting so close to something and getting screwed out of it. And I've felt that way many times, really. It's ultimately like, you know what? You throw a bucket of water on a fire. Now you got to go downhill, get another bucket of water, and throw it on a fire, really. So I really felt that's how he felt through this match, really. Like with Omega being so resilient. And at the end of the show, he turns heel. And I'm very worried about this because this can go into some good directions and some bad directions. The good directions, I'll say, is that obviously maybe Hangman and Swerve can become a heel tag team. Or they can join MJF and they can have something called like maybe the Devil's Rodeo or something like that, really. Or the Devil's Cowboys or something like that, really. That could be an interesting direction. And then it's like Brody King, Bandito, and a few other people could be that next generation of wrestlers going against like maybe a group of wrestlers who are kind of like the bad guys. That could be an interesting direction. My biggest fear is two things: that they're going to do a Texas death match, and Hangman is going to get screwed over by Swerve, because really this storyline between Swerve and Hangman has ended. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see another book on this because it's going to be just repeat mode. So that's kind of my biggest concern is that they're going to like say, okay, well, Hangman's going to get screwed by Swerve. They're going to do a couple months of wrestling each other. And I don't want to see that because that's just too repeat for me. So definitely, I mean, I think as other people said, like one of the good things about this is how Swerve is when he's a heel. He's violent. He doesn't think. So it does kind of increase the questioning of what's going to happen between MJF and Adam Page. How is Swerve? What is Swerve going to do? Or is Swerve going to do anything? How is it going to matter really? Because it's almost very similar to All In Texas, where Swerve made the choice to help Adam Page because he was like, you know what? The past is the past. We both hurt each other. But sometimes you gotta just let shit go and understand that there's a bigger, an issue bigger than them, which is that AW is run by people who are just douchebags. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do with Swerve, and I think that's very compelling television. Many of the matches I didn't really I watched and I wasn't really invested into. Like you did Mark Davis versus John Moxley. I wasn't invested in this because you obviously know who wins and who loses. I was not invested in Kevin Knight versus Mortos because obviously Mortos loses every matches. Maybe they should do matches where it's almost like you don't know who's going to win or lose. And I also missed. I also just like skipped by some parts of the show. Um, so I know like I think it was like the Dirty Birds or something like that. That's Alex Windsor and Jamie Hayter. They had a squash match, and I also thought there was another squash match on the show. Really, so you kind of just know what was going to happen. Um, on the show, I also was happy that they said, okay, we're going to announce a couple of matches um, for AEW Revolution because the show's like 3 weeks away, and I respect them for doing that. You have not a lot of time to build to stuff, so it's FTR versus the Young Bucks. It's also going to be Takeshita versus John Moxley Part 3, and MJF versus Hangman Adam Page in a stipulation match. And then the other stipulation to that is if Adam Page loses, he can never challenge for the AEW Championship for the rest of his life. So, FTR versus Young Bucks, we've seen that before, so it's a little bit of like repeat mode. Takeshita versus John Moxley, that's not a good match because I don't like them doing another match with these guys because it's a little too repetitive. And but I always like the work that Takeshita does, really. So it's ultimately like a 50-50 for me, but it's something that I will tolerate. I'll tolerate it. But MJF versus Hangman, that's something I want to talk about right now. That Hangman versus MJF had a promo, and I think what they said was a little confusing to me because what they said was that um, two things is that if Adam Page loses, he can never challenge for the AEW championship for the rest of his career. I got that. But one thing I didn't get was that they said something like it's gonna be a regular match, and then Adam Page said something like, you know what, you at least got to give me a stipulation for this because it's such, a big deal really. And then MJF said something like, I get to choose the stipulation. So, and MJ was kind of advocating for a regular match, a regular pinfall match, not a, stipulation type of thing. So I think that from the crowd and from what Hangman was advertising, they may do a Texas death match, and then MJF may say, you know what, I'll beat you at your game, cowboy, because that's going to show how good I am that I can beat you in your match. And I could also go down in history as making sure you never become a world champion again. But the problem is, I don't want to see another Texas death match. Unfortunately, I left my notebook at work. My douchebag of a boss made me stay an extra half an hour. And I don't have my notes with me, but I do remember my notes. So, they cannot keep doing AEW pay-per-views with hardcore matches as a main event. For example, last year at Revolution, they had a triple main event. So it was a triple threat match with Adam, Christian, and John Moxley. They also did Will Ospreay versus Kyle Fletcher in a steel cage match, and they also had Tony Storm and Mariah May in a in a Hollywood ending match. So two of the main events in that one were hardcore matches. At Dynasty, you didn't have a hardcore match main event, but you had Swerve put John Moxley through a ladder and table. So let's call that hardcore. Double or Nothing, Anarchy in the Arena. I know the main event was Ospreay versus Hangman, but Anarchy in the Arena is what it's known for. All In, you ended it with a Texas death match. So, Forbidden Door, you had the lights out match. At All Out, you did not do your main event was not, their main event was not anything hardcore, but at, Wrestle Dream, they had the I Quit match between Moxley and Darby Allin. Sting saves the day, bitches. You had Blood and Guts, which is like a pseudo pay-per-view, but a week after Blood and Guts, you had Samoa Joe versus Adam Page in a steel cage. And then at World's End, you had a Fatal 4-Way. And Fatal 4-Ways are no DQ matches. But I'll take down 1 point because they did not use hardcore matches, really. So if you think about all the pay per views, and you also have a show that had like multiple main events, 8 in a period of a year. So now we're going to have 9 if they do that with the Texas Death Match. So like 9 9 hardcore matches or bloody matches in a year. Like again, this is not Combat Zone Wrestling. This is AEW, so they have to be a little bit careful of that. I would not even mind if they did like an hour-long match or something like that, because obviously you're doing something different. And then also, as I said before, that the problem is if you do something like Mark Briscoe setting up a chair, or like last year they had an issue with Mark Briscoe going through burning tables, a lot. If you do something like Jeff Hardy and Matt Hardy always in ladder matches, or if you do something like Adam Page always in Texas Death matches, um, as I said, it feels very Combat Zone Wrestling. It also feels like, oh well, there's nothing else he can do outside a Texas Death match. And then, as I said, it's just the repeat button. And I even hate saying this, but I'm going to Tokyo the same night, really. So like 3 hours and 50 minutes after my show, I'm going to Tokyo. So a big concern about that is I might say to myself, well, hell, if the main event's gonna be, kind of a repeat, I may just not stay for the main event. I may just leave like 30, 40 minutes earlier to make sure I get that motherfucker of a flight, because my flight ticket's like $400 really. And my hotel room's like $400. So obviously I don't want to be, missing out on my lifelong goal dream, American dream to go to Japan. So I might even just like skip it because I'm gonna be down at Revolution. So I'm kind of a little worried about what they might do for a main event. And then also many people may say, hey, you know what, there's a lot of repeats. There's too many repeats on this pay per view. And AEW's been criticized for that with a lot of their pay per views. That a lot of it has way too many matches. A lot of matches that could be main events of Collision or Dynamite. A lot of people criticize their pay per views for being longer than they need to be, and then a lot of people criticize their pay per views for having a lot of repeats, a lot of repeat matches. So they have to be very very careful about this. Um, So it's gonna be really interesting to see what they do and to see if they're actually gonna make people care about the pay per view, or the people are gonna be like, oh well, here we go again. This is Combat Zone Wrestling with a larger budget. They do another Texas Death Match. And then also too, they have Swerve betray Hangman. Then a lot of people are gonna say, okay, same old shit. Um, we're just gonna repeat the same storyline because AEW doesn't know how to stop doing that. The next thing that I want to say is that a couple things that I also liked about the show was that the demand is challenging Jet Set Rodeo for the trios titles, and I'm very very happy about this. Like I do want Ricochet and the Demand to win because actually I think they make a great trios team. They're instigators. The dynamics work. I think Ricochet could be a good a good double champion. I think the problem with Hangman and the problem with Jet Set Rodeo is that they've had way too many singles matches. And they're trying to make Kevin Knight look like, oh, well, he could be a world champion one day. So why are you having these guys hold trios titles? Why do you have Jet Speed, which is a tag team, and now they're doing single stuff? And why do you have Hangman in a trios when he's actually going after the world championship? It's just a lack of continuity. And then also too, it's not, people should not be holding titles if it's just something they don't care about. Like for example, when you had I think like Will Nightingale, like for example, like she doesn't really represent the TBS championship that well. She represents the women's tag team championship very well, really. Like that's a great example. Like how many times has she defended the TBS championship or talked about how that meant something to be a double champion? So if you're gonna have, like, every belt you have should represent every belt you have should kind of represent, something you fight for, really, So that's kind of an issue when you don't do that. And with AEW, they need to say things like, okay, well, maybe Gates of Agony, Ricochet could be that prick with a national championship, but he also can be a prick with a trios title. He can do double duty. I think that with every title he gains, like if he gained like 5 titles, he would just make people like pissed with him by having 5 titles, and he would know how to kind of like have matches with people. Or if he just had 2 titles, the trios and the national championship, I say you put money on Ricochet. I think that he would make both those titles stand out, along with the Gates of Agony, because the Gates of Agony have been hungry for titles, and they've proven to me that they give a fuck to such a degree that I actually am big fans of them now, because I think they kind of came out as quirky or wannabe I think they want to be Roman Reigns family. I think it's called the Anoa'i family, or the Anoa'i family, if I'm saying it correct. If I'm not, I apologize. But they've kind of been on the roster. They kind of look a little lost. A lot of people kind of say, okay, they're a Roman Reigns rip off, but they've kind of come off as like these two intense badasses. Like, you know what, we really want to represent. We really want titles. We really want to be acknowledged. We're both big, bad, strong people, and there's not a lot of big, bad, strong people, really. So they actually have a goal of just gaining titles, being a force of destruction, really. So I think that they're at the point where I think titles can work. And if you do something like Dalton Castle and the Outrunners versus the Demand at Wembley Stadium, I think you would have something great. You can do Jet Set Rodeo in a rematch. You can do the Young Bucks and Jack Perry. There's so many things that you can kind of do. They can really reinvent the trios division. So I really am happy that they're calling Jet Set Rodeo out, and they should win. They need to win for those titles. They need to win, but I don't think that's going to happen. They also had a fatal 4-way match with the TBS Championship, and again, I actually think Megan Bayne, in my opinion, is ready to be a trios. Is ready to be the TBS champion. I think it's time to take it off of Willow and give it to somebody else. So that way, you're doing something different. If you want to do Marina Shafir, she's been with John Moxley for such a long time that I think that you got to pull the trigger on that. I really, really think that just giving it to Willow is a bad idea because, as I said, she's a double champion now. She's not going to do double duty on pay-per-views, so you kind of have to really, really wonder with Willow what's going to happen with the TBS championship. And I think that, as I said, if she's just wearing it and it's going nowhere, you just have to say that's just not what we do with titles. We have to keep our titles in motion, really. There was something that happened on the show that I want to talk about that's very serious. When Kenny Omega was in the audience, there was a fan that patted his shoulder, and then the security guards took one hand, and another person took another hand off of him because they're like, hey, don't touch him, Kenny Omega. And I do want to talk about this. Was that I remember like one time when I was at an AEW show, I got drunk. I had one drink. It was a little too much for me. I was standing in the ringside area. Not the ringside area, but like I was standing like in like, like where the there was like a path for camera crew and everybody to go, really. So I remember Wheeler Yuta shoving me out of the way and a security guard shoving me out of the way, really. And I was like, what the fuck? I've been bullied a lot of my life. That's kind of a mean thing to do. Fuck AEW. I don't want to go to more shows because I've always been bullied in my life. Byron gets bullied. Byron can never stand up for himself. So, or I'm not allowed to stand up for myself because I remember growing up in a house where it's almost like if I got into a fight with the neighborhood bully for bullying me, my dad would be like, okay, you got to fight me because you want to go around fighting people. I don't care, even if it's the neighborhood bully, you walk away. But the point of it is that I learned to be accountable for my action. I said to myself, you know what? I was wrong to not be paying attention. So I remember like on Twitter, I sent a message to Wheeler Yuta and I apologized. I sent a message to Adam Cole and I said, hey man, you were signaling me to get the fuck out of the way. I apologize. And there's some security guards on AEW Twitter, and I reached out and apologized to them, and I said, hey, I wasn't paying attention. That was on me, really. And I also remember like one time, like Jim Ross, he like during like the Sting retirement, he was going backstage, and I remember like standing in front of him, just reaching out my hand, like I wanted to shake his hand. But there's some people just like looking at me like, hey, just leave this guy alone, really. And then I just picked up on that. And then another time I wasn't paying attention. I remember like they had like a bunch of people talking, and a bunch of people talking. It was like Jeff Jarrett, Renee, and I remember like one security guys grabbed me and saying, "Hey, watch where you're walking." And he wasn't being mean. He didn't want me to walk behind them because then I'll be on camera. But then also you don't know what people are going to do. And then I also remember one time Adam Copeland when he came down at Wrestle Dream. I ran up and I gave him a hug really because everybody was patting him on the back. I did that, and then the only reason why I did that is because of the Michael Jackson. Um, they don't care about us music video where a woman in Brazil like grabs him and gives him a hug really. So I was imitating that, but the point of it is I learned the hard way. You know what? If you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. If you fuck around, you find out really. And I will just say personally, I do apologize to AEW. I apologize for Adam Copeland and anybody else really, because honestly, do not put your hands on these people because two things is I don't want anybody to get their ass kicked, and then security guards. It's that old saying: if they just push you or shove you or knock you down, or if a wrestler like MJF gets mad and he punches you in the face, really, these guys are making 100 grand a year. Tony's a billionaire. You're gonna walk away with a bloody nose and kind of like some scraps really. And it's not because they're bullies; it's because they have to be like, okay, the inmates don't control the asylum really. So I don't want anything like that to ever happen to anybody ever again. So this fan, be careful, learn from my mistakes. And then also too, these wrestlers are human beings. You know what? I've been sexually harassed a lot of times in my life. I don't like people touching me. I know like sometimes at work I fall asleep and my boss, like the other day, he was slapping my foot and I almost got into a murderous rage because all times in my life I've been sexually harassed or touched inappropriately by men, even though his intention was not to sexually harass me. It was to say, hey, even though you're working 14 fucking hours, get off your fucking ass, really. You know what? 14 hours means you're 14 hours on the clock, really. So that's all important. So again, do not touch these wrestlers. I will never touch a wrestler. If Kenny Omega's right behind me, I'll be like, okay, okay, my hands are in the air. My hands are in the air. I'm not putting my hands on him. I'm not putting my hands on him. You know what? He's a human being. He has his own space and whatever, really. And if I get excited and I give a wrestler a hug or whatever, I'll be like, I'm an emotional person, and I need help. I need help because I've been emotional through my entire life, really, and I need to work on that. But don't put your hands on wrestlers, guys. Because as I said, you know what? If you guys win like $100 on a scratch off, and somebody that you don't know is hugging you or patting you on the back or grabbing you and like doing a selfie with you, that's how these wrestlers feel, really. So be very careful of that. But overall, really good show, and the positives outweigh the negatives. They are moving. They're putting titles on the line, especially with teams that are not really defending or doing stuff with titles. I really appreciate that. Revolution might be a little repetitive, but I appreciate them creating some matches now instead of just like the last week or two. And and yeah, and I think that and then Brody King's coming back, so I'm a little, and that's the last thing I want to talk about. I'm worried about Brody King. I think he might come back on a Collision so they can edit the fuck ice chance, but he needs to come back to television and do what he needs to do. Really, don't hide him. Actually feature him and all that stuff. So it is what it is. So I hope that Brody King's not being punished. I actually want to see Brody King versus Samoa Joe, and I hope that happens.